A very good evening to everyone present here today. I, Soumya Jain, along with my co-host Angela Jacob, would like to welcome you all warmly on behalf of the Great Lakes team and faculty to today's analytics panel discussion as a part of Sapience 2021. Analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning are all subjects with growing popularity every single day. And why wouldn't they? After all, it's through these techniques that we can create sense out of the millions and millions of data points available to us.
The theme for Sapiens this year is purpose-driven business in a post-pandemic world. What an absolutely apt theme for the times we are living in. And according to Analytics Insights magazine, during the COVID-19 pandemic, AI/ML has been the only area which has seen the least job cuts. And today, aren't we all just extremely lucky to discuss this very interesting topic with the wonderful force and knowledge of our panelists and our moderator, Professor Purnima.
Great Lakes has been the first Indian B school to introduce artificial intelligence and machine learning as full-time specializations to students and has also been featured among the top 10 data science institutes by Analytics Insight magazine. All thanks to the amazing and qualified faculty we have with us and the status that our institute holds in this field. But before we begin, I would request Dr. Bappaditya Mukhopadhyay, Professor in the area of Analytics and Director of the Great Lakes PGPPA course, to put forth the welcome address.
Thank you. I'll just keep it very short, given that we have wonderful speakers lined up and we have only about 90 minutes to accommodate all the ideas and thought. So welcome you all, each one of you, everyone. I'll begin with the students that you guys are here on a Thursday evening, and all the faculty and no doubt the most esteemed panelists and some of the great minds from the industry. In tune with the good Indian tradition, we always keep the last, the best for the last in terms of the food items which we serve, so that the taste lingers. And analytics panel being the last one in the Sapiens, I'm sure is going to have some ideas, some debates, and some discussions which everyone will remember. So as a part of the analytics area, I'm slightly selfishly saying that analytics panel is going to be probably the best which we're going to remember. And just so many things that because of pandemics that has happened. So from all industries having the common threat of the working conditions, that how do you remotely manage work atmospheres, to challenges which analytics industry particularly faces, as well as opportunities, because now a lot of companies wants to go online and they have to do the business or take decisions based on completely remote places, but data-driven decisions. And therefore that not only means that you do analysis from far for the business continuity, you also have to kind of figure out ways to capture new kind of data, either through sensors or either to the digital footprints people keep. And there are so many things which we are going to learn and face, right? And therefore I think it would be a great opportunity for each one of us to hear these panelists, these ideas, which has a perfect balance of people from the finance, from the regulatory side, from the health, from the marketing division, and then from the organizational experts. So not only the domains, but different kinds of techniques. And this surely promises to be a wonderful set of discussions which we are going to have. As I said, it would be prudent of me not to take any more time, because all of us are eagerly waiting for to hear them. And thank you, each one of you, for being able to join, because we do understand that while you can join the panel from wherever you are, but the new set of challenges are that our time is no longer our time. So many of us who try to commit to certain even online meetings, we are unable to fulfill that because something surely comes up and then takes our time. So in spite of that each one of you could join, we could take time to be part of this panel, share your experiences with the students. Uh, I'm particularly grateful and welcome you all. So thank you. Let's wish a great discussion, aptly moderated by Dr. Purnima Gupta.
Thank you, sir. Now we would like to take the opportunity to welcome our panelists for the day. Our first panelist is Ms. Aarti Bharadwaj. Contributing with the initial years of her career to Tata Energy Research Institute, Ms. Bharadwaj went on to serve as director and vice president in companies such as Mindshare, Starcom Media West Group, and Publicis Media. Currently a part of Essence Global as the regional practice lead analytics for the Asia Pacific region, she specializes in the area of consulting, research, marketing, and economics. We welcome you, ma'am.
Our next panelist is Mr. Avilash Chandra. Starting his career at McKinsey & Company, Mr. Chandra eventually went on to be the Chief Operating Officer, India's Strategy and Operations Practice at Deloitte Consulting. He also served as director at Monitor Deloitte. Currently, a senior director at Capgemini, he builds and monetizes competitive solutions focused on AI ML for his clients. We welcome you, sir.
Our next panelist is Mr. Swapna Tambi. Progressing his career from TCS to IBM and then Capital One, Mr. Tambi is currently the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at BNY Mellon. He was recently recognized as a part of the 40 under 40 data scientists list as announced by the Analytics magazine, and was also recognized by Upgrad as an industry expert to help design curriculum and teach MBA students. Welcome, sir.
Our next panelist of the day is Mr. Vineet Shukla. Having paved his career with the likes of Infosys, Motorola Mobility, and United Health Group, Mr. Vineet Shukla currently holds the position of Group Vice President, Head of Data at Mahindra. He is responsible for strategizing, architecting, and delivering big data analytics to businesses across the Mahindra Group. Welcome, sir.
And our last panelist for the day is Mr. Vishnu Podapati. Collecting his initial experiences from companies like Citibank, Barclays, and Prop Fund, Mr. Podapati started his entrepreneurial journey by becoming the chief executive and founder of HedgeLoop, a company recognized by NASSCOM amongst the 50 most innovative startups of the country. His team specializes in predictive modeling using deep learning models to prepare trading algorithms and much more. We welcome you, sir.
And finally, introducing our moderator for the day, Dr. Purnima Gupta. With a PhD focused in human resources management, personnel administration, Professor Poornima Gupta has been an integral part of the Great Lakes family, contributing through her skills in analytics, OP and HR, brand management, and employee training. Welcome, ma'am. I would like to request Poornima ma'am to now commence the panel discussion.
Thank you, Soumya and Angela. I'm sorry for the misspelling of the name, but I'm honored to be moderating this panel with such eminent speakers from a variety of industries like finance, media, manufacturing, consulting, and all in the domain of analytics. One of the key themes for the Sapiens is, has the global pandemic changed the AI ML world and industry? We are seeing a number of unicorns being born both in India as well as internationally, riding the digital euphoria. Has the pandemic affirmed the place of analytics as the key source of competitive advantage? In the era of AI-driven hyper-personalized experiences and automated services with autonomous cars and automated homes, everything being automated, has India created a strong foundation of innovations in fintech, edtech, payments, and can it carry this advantage in manufacturing other services? So we will try to understand that what all the industries are dealing with. So I would like to ask, or I would like to start with Mr. Aarti Bharadwaj, that in the world of IoT, digital, and other automation, how do companies figure out the right business model and adopt the best practices. So your views, please, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for that. That's actually a very relevant question. From the perspective of media and marketing, one needs to think about purpose and especially from the data and analytics perspective. One needs to think about purpose in two ways, and the idea is to think about how brands can have meaningful interactions with their customers or consumers. At the end of the day, the role that media and marketing play is to drive a meaningful interaction between brands and their prospective customers and current consumers. Now, when we think about meaningful, it's meaningful is different for different people, right? For different agents in this problem. For a brand, the communication is meaningful if they're able to drive some outcomes out of it. Those outcomes are business outcomes, those outcomes can be brand outcomes, but it is a meaningful interaction if they are able to see an uplift in brand metrics or they're able to see an uplift in business, sales, revenue. The other aspect or the other side of the point to think about is for a consumer, it is a meaningful interaction if I do not feel annoyed by the message and I do not feel like my privacy is violated by the communication. And that's where there is a fine line that is drawn in the use of data, in the use of AI or ML in media and marketing. While we do use AI and ML on top of all of the data that comes in today with the kind of footprint that we leave in the digital space, we're leaving behind so much. I mean, like the common joke, right? That Google knows more about you than your family does. That puts exactly responsibility on the analysts to use that data responsibly. While we are able to use custom creatives, and we're able to say exactly to the right person, the right time, the right messaging, and all of that can be done with AI and ML. There's also the responsibility that we do not cross that line that makes the consumer feel, either the consumer feel that their privacy is being violated in any way, and also we follow certain ethics, like should we be advertising in a way that we give any sort of irresponsible messaging, and that's where there's a lot of ethics in AI. So in that sense, I said a lot, but in a nutshell, the use of AI and ML and IoT comes from the fact that as we think about IoT, we're collecting more and more data and data points about users. And there's a layer of AI and ML that helps us make more meaningful connections with them. But at the same time, there's a lot of responsibility this has put on analysts in terms of how they can use that AI and ML. So we can only, there is the responsibility that we can do certain distance, but we have to stop after that. So that's been the latest in advertising. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Aarti. That's very good. Like, yeah, its responsibility becomes a main feature now because so much of data is available. How do we use it? That is something which we need to be careful about. Mr. Shukla, your views? Has the use of analytics changed with the pandemic?
So let me answer your question from two perspectives, right? And you talked about business models, starting with your question. And let me divide the whole business model basically into two parts. One is how we are reaching out to the customers, how we are positioning ourselves to the customers, and how the demand is increasing, etc. And the second one is how a business is basically running and how a business is basically operating, and what are changes we are doing with respect to running the show. I see that in both of the cases, when we talk about machine learning and AI, we have been seeing a good degree of adoption uh, even before the pandemic days. But what happened was during the pandemic time, as Aarti was also mentioning, that there is a sudden surge with respect to how some of the businesses should be basically behaving, because now everybody is sitting their houses, and everybody wants to go to digital. The way how we are reaching out to our customers, in many ways, when it was offline, it has suddenly become online, and hence the way how we want to bring the digitization in terms of how we're reaching out to the customers, how we are engaging the customers, how we are trying to understand the customer centricity, how we are trying to get the feedback from the customers. It's all being digitized, and when it's all being digitized, the AI and machine learning is basically the backbone for all this digitization, and it's basically helping us in all the ways. For example, the way how we reach out to the customers. So basically, in order to reach out to the customers, we need to have a lead to be generated. When the leads are generated, then we should know that which are those specific customers we should be reaching out to. And hence, some of the machine learning and AI models are basically helping us in terms of doing that, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit about how we are engaging with the customers when we are running the business. And same thing has happened in the business areas as well, with respect to how we are running the show, how we are basically bringing the processes in place, right? And what is happening is, in the post-pandemic era and even before, the way we want to basically bring in the technology into the picture, and we want to bring in the machine learning and AI into the picture, because the demand on the left side is happening, it's increasing. What is happening is we also need to bring in the cost effectiveness, we also need to bring in the process optimization into place, and in order to basically do so, again, machine learning and AI helping us. Yes. So just to close my sentence, one, on the value creation perspective, I see that machine learning and AI is playing a huge role. And again, on the second time, when we are running the businesses, from the cost optimization side, is also playing a huge role. And we would keep on seeing it basically happening more and more in coming days. Hope that basically.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Can we have Mr. Chandra, your views, please? In your industry, like how has analytics changed post-pandemic, or it has just evolved or continued the way it was?
Yep, absolutely. And before I go ahead with my views, thank you to all the audience and then all of you for inviting me. It feels great to be in this esteemed company of panelists. So I would one say definitely, like as the saying goes, all of us are familiar with that pandemic has been the greatest chief digital officer for all the organizations, right? What CDOs could not do in the last decade, around which the time for which the post has been around, right? The pandemic did in a year. And that digital thing I would extend to analytics, AI, ML as well. Clearly, with pandemic context in mind, I would say, some of the usual things, just take one example of doing things in a contactless manner, doing things in a remote manner. If you look at the applications across industry, right from facial recognitions at the airport, where you can just, pass through security, etc., without touching anything, without anyone ever touching you, to getting it closer to industry that I spend more time in, which is financial services. There, if I look at, say a few parts of the value chain, from customer acquisition, we talked about that, to customer onboarding, to actually customer servicing, to back-end processing of a lot of documentation. So what I see is that in almost all of these parts of the value chain, AI, ML, and its use has suddenly picked up a lot. And the conversation that we were having with our clients before pandemic and the conversations we had during pandemic, if I can tell you, essentially, tons of conversations that we had with our clients even a year before the pandemic started on these topics. And these are all very, very intuitive things. Not that these technologies have not been around. They have been around for at least 5 years now. How do you kind of do cognitive document processing to ease the backend document processing, for example, for a bank? Because lots and lots of people are today doing those things manually. How do you kind of use facial recognition and remote onboarding of customers, etc.? Now, we have been pitching these things to our clients for like at least 3 years now. And suddenly the pitches that we had made 2 years before the pandemic started, the clients started calling us during pandemic that, hey, can you come and do these things now? So that's a good, from my vantage point, from what we do, that was a good validation of the way the demand has picked up. So clearly, customer acquisition part, many of the banks and insurance companies are now becoming a lot more smarter in figuring out who their target customer could be, how to generate leads, how to actually target them, what's the right means of targeting them, etc. And the change that I see happening is that perhaps pre-pandemic, a lot of this was with a lot of manual intervention in analytics. So people sitting and doing the analytics. What happened, and this is an ongoing change that I see, is that now even those things are being automated, and those are being done by models, like machine learning models that self-optimize themselves. So that is one big change. Similarly, on customer acquisition, I think RBI, customer onboarding, RBI came up with this regulation that where they allowed remote onboarding of customers. So essentially on phone, a bank could onboard a customer that was not possible beforehand. Customer servicing, this was a great fillip to all the voice recognition and kind of voice analytics part of things, where when lots of agents, customer service agents were working remotely, suddenly these companies became aware of how to maintain quality of conversations. And the call qualities that were earlier being monitored manually, suddenly we started kind of listening into them, using machine, and then analyzing, seeing patterns, and basis that many of our clients are now developing models where they can not only detect quality problems, but actually deliver nudges to kind of real time fix some of those problems with the agents. So entire gamut of business process, and this is just one industry I gave you, which I am closer to. I can give you many examples of like these, where things that were held up for past 5 years, just shot off. So I would essentially, my mental model of this is that this was almost a volcano that was building up. All of us who have been in the space of AI know that AI goes through its winters, right? And in the recent kind of avatar of AI, perhaps the last 4 or 5 years were the years where momentum was gathering. Pandemic time was the time when it really kind of took off and achieved the escape velocity.
Great, Chandra. We would love to hear all the examples, though this panel discussion does not have that much of time. But you said that a lot of digital revolution started happening because of the pandemic, and you gave some examples about the financial industry. But what are the major areas? Like one you said about recruitment and onboarding of customers. What are other areas do you think that after pandemic this digital thing became more prominent?
See, so I gave you 4 areas, Dr. Purnima. So one is just the customer target, lead generation, right? How do you kind of identify potential customers? How do you target them? The entire analytics that happens around it, and actually the execution of that analytics. So if I am a potential customer, now the way today companies are kind of zeroing down upon me and people like me, one is more sophisticated, and 2, part of it is automated. Second part is just the execution of reach out to me, when what type of communication needs to go out, etc., so that the probability of me latching onto that communication and then reaching out saying, yes, I want to know more about your product, I want to sign up for your service, etc., increases. Onboarding is a very day-to-day business case. If you know banks, telcos, these types of companies spend tons of money on onboarding customers. So in this case, I think the technology was already in place, but as I said, the RBI regulation came and gave that fillip where people could be onboarded remotely. Now the 2 other areas I said, one is customer service. I spoke about the voice thing and all of it, but the last area, which is business processes, right, being digitized using AI ML, is one area where actually, even as we speak, a lot of effort and investment is going on. And to put it simply, look at any of these large organizations. There is a huge engine that really runs them in the backend. So every time, say they are onboarding me as a customer, again, I'm taking the same example. The amount of documentation, the maker checker, someone who is matching my name from my Aadhaar to something else, etc. It's immense, right? Someone does it, someone puts it up in the system, someone kind of says that, yes, this is correct, etc. Then it goes to the next step and all of it. And these are the things that we have known that these need to be digitized. We have had technology to digitize these things for at least 7-8 years now. Only now during pandemic, when suddenly we realize that the companies realize that, that there is immense value in doing this. And it was also the fact that suddenly people who were to sit in an office space and do this were not there, but these things still needed to be done. So that part I see taking a huge fillip in terms of new volume of work that we are seeing and we are getting. And for a company like ours, which is IT services, where it becomes important is that we are anyways are in some ways, to use a very mean term, we are the plumbers, right, behind working the IT systems for organizations. So we anyways know what is there, what gets into what, which data flows where, etc. Now, in that workflow, if we bring in business understanding and we automate, some parts of that value chain using some of these technologies. And by the way, as all of us know, these technologies in themselves are not super novel, right? All it takes is pulling one API from here, there, doing some massaging on it, on the model, etc. But if you can integrate it well with your business value chain, and in the process reduce cost, or in the process kind of do things faster that helps you get more revenue, that's where suddenly these types of investments for organizations also start paying off very soon. So essentially, we embark upon a 12-month transformation program to say that we are introducing these things into this part of your value chain. Perhaps the benefits that we can showcase them based on 3 months of our work will pay for the remaining 12 months of our work and beyond that. So that's one area where I see a lot of work and investment happening for organizations, where backend processes are being kind of digitized, and in the process, a lot of these AI ML technologies are being used.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. That's interesting because earlier people used to feel a little scared or saying that we are not big enough to invest in the digital because it takes too much of time and effort. And we are, anyways, we had a lot of people that we didn't need to. But now with this pandemic, I think that's changing.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, big time. So, Mr. Podapati, now, would you like to share your views on, in your industry, how analytics has changed over the past couple of years?
Sure. Like Aarti pointed out, how they work towards advertising, and how Vineet pointed out about onboarding of clients, and Avilash also pointed out about how banks are trying to onboard clients. So in the whole supply chain, we come to the later part. We collect all this data and we use those data for our models. End of the day is we are a product. So our product job is to make money, right? We build machines for the global secondary markets. So this data, we use it and massage it. As Avinash said, machines are available, and end of the day, P&L should be positive. But what we have seen pre-pandemic and post-pandemic is this is not the way we used to analyze the data earlier, right? And we are seeing a lot of change in the data. And right now, I think this is a classic time for us to understand whether this is a noise or a signal, right? Earlier, we used to have a backtested data, understand, differentiate noise from signal, and then assume there are some assumptions, and then take part in a trade or something like that. But this is a classic example, and this is an outlier actually. The pandemic is an outlier if you look at it in a statistical way. I think this sets a basic foundation for the future data, right? And how are we going to use the data? How are we going to use the noise? But if you look at secondary markets, there has been a turmoil, in terms of the volatility in the markets, the kind of moves in the market. But this is the foundation for the future. And I think that's where if you're looking at the kind of natural language processing, the sentiment data, what we collect, it's been, I think the sentiment data has been huge, and we collect the data what Aarti collects too. And we try to understand the sentiment of the market and then use it for, use it to our clients. But ideally, I believe this is the time to understand and to diversify into new markets.
Thank you, Mr. Podapati. That's very interesting that how the use of data has changed, because data has been there, although the collection of data, as Mr. Chandra said, has increased in the past couple of years. And yeah, Aarti, would you like to say something?
If I may just add, because you made a very valid point. We've been collecting data for a long time, and like you said, we've been collecting data about customer behavior, audiences, etc., for years and years, right? And we've been analyzing, and like you said, statistically, this is an outlier. It's a break in the trend. Having said that, in the past, any similar event like the 2009 crash or any other such economic crisis that markets have faced or humankind has faced has meant that behaviors do change. And so, in my, I don't think we fully know the impact that COVID has had on people. We will need to see where this settles down, because I'm not sure any of us is going back to our pre-pandemic behaviors anytime soon. Like a lot of us, I mean, something as simple as work from home. A lot of us in 2019 could not have imagined work from home. And now a lot of us don't want to go back 5 days a week. And so I think from a data perspective, we don't even know where this is going to go. The impact of the pandemic is probably going to unfold over the next 5 years. And we're just scratching the surface from the data perspective.
Absolutely.
Very true, very true. Swapnil, if you'd like to share your thoughts about how the investments and these things have changed.
Certain. So I agree with the fellow panelists, right? And I guess, Avinash, I like your analogy of volcanoes and the winter era of AI. So beginning of the pandemic, right? Given that there is so much hype around AI, ML, analytics, especially last few years, I seen a lot of criticism around this that, hey, you guys were not able to predict COVID and the impact of that, like as Aarti and Vish recently pointed out. And yeah, we were not supposed to predict this outlier event. This is an outlier event because people still keep on asking me, okay, you guys couldn't predict this, but then now you have learned something from this. In the future, would you be able to predict? So the answer is no. I mean, these are the outlier events. AI ML is not a silver bullet. So we can't solve for this, right? But that being said, initially criticism apart, we have seen the pandemic has accelerated the digital adoption across industries and across functions, right? My two young kids, they are attending this online school for last 2 years, like nursery and senior KG. It was hard to imagine that they would be sitting in front of computer, those small kids for 3-4 hours. But the school has come up with like human-centered design approach, reimagine the whole experience, right? So a lot of digital adoption and the need and why it happened. Of course, customers were demanding, company had to survive. They didn't go online, didn't go digital. They wouldn't be able to survive, right? But the second thing is regulators, especially in the financial services side, right, have opened up a lot. So I work a lot with the US regulators and US financial services. Last year, they invited requests for comments as they were guiding or putting together a framework for AI ML in the financial services. So there we see a lot of partnership coming from regulators and the banking institutions to be able to use this AI ML and the advanced analytics techniques. The implications of it have been, as some of the panelists talked about, are great, right? Far reaching. One thing is the location strategy. What I see is a lot of banks are open to setting up their captive units in India. So it helps us in India, like a lot of analytics roles I see opening up because for banks, anyhow, let's say majority of Indians are working in the analytics group in the US. So why not hire the people from India and set up the captive center here? For me personally, our offices are in limited location, but now what this pandemic has allowed me to hire people sitting in Bangalore because it's work from home. And like even like post pandemic, we would be most likely be working from home. And the third implication I would say is use cases. At least the beginning side, beginning of the pandemic, right? Because we didn't have a lot of data, the behaviors were changed. So I saw a less use of predictive and prescriptive type of models, but more of a basic diagnostic and descriptive models, like why certain thing happened and what can we do about it, those type of things. So use cases change a little bit for the time being. And now people have understood also the importance of collaborating with the third party, because for banks to gather all this data, it will take multiple years. we don't have that. So if we collaborate with the third party, let's say with the health institute, to get some COVID number, we can rebuild some of the models and then start using it for the predictive and prescriptive stuff.
Thank you, Swapnil. So that brings me. Oh, Professor Mudit has a question. I think you want to add something, Professor?
Yeah, actually, sorry, my throat. Yeah, so there was something in the discussion and I couldn't, stop myself from, because this is something that we have been thinking about. So this is not just the value chain of the industry, but the value chain around the way we do analytics itself is changing quite a bit. I think Vish made a very important point around data collection and storage. Those who are familiar would know that, the technology platforms and the backend stuff around that is changing quite a bit with emergence of cloud getting, cost of cloud adoption getting cheaper by the day. There is also talk about, where the data should be hosted. My question to any of the panelists, but since Vish mentioned that point, was what are the changes that you're seeing in the marketplace with respect to data storage? Is it that the traditional data warehousing model that we used to speak about is still valid? Or because of emergence of, first party, second party, third party data, where data can come in all sorts of form, structure, technology, and things like that. How are you seeing the changes in basically storage and in the way in which you access the data?
Sure.
And possibly the implications for that in terms of spends by the companies, and if maybe Avinash also can comment on that as to what is happening in that space. Because people often say that analytics is easier. It's the data strategy, which is the hardest part to figure out. And interestingly, you mentioned that one of the biggest challenge for you is to separate noise from signal. So what is garbage and what is non-garbage? How do you actually keep the differentiation, or is everything important to store? Every click, so it would be interesting to hear your views on the same.
Sure with it. First thing is, where you collect the data from. So one point of data collection is not sufficient nowadays. You have multiple point of data collection. And first thing is, after you get the data, how do you clean the data? This is pre-pandemic, right? Once you create models to clean the data and from multiple sources, and which are actually majority of them are trash, right? So you have to have a meaningful data, send that data to not a traditional data source, a warehouse that would be very expensive. You have, apart from Amazons and DigitalOceans, you have a lot of younger data centers in Germany, which are 1/20th of the cost, right? So now the cost for saving the data and running the simulation is 1/20th, right? This is pre-pandemic. Now, post that, once the pandemic has come, now data has increased. Now you are trying to collect sensor data, you're trying to collect sentiment data, and you're trying to collect the COVID data. So you have at least another 20-25% of data more, right? Now the cost of saving the data is actually much lesser. How do you have the right resources to clean the data and then send that meaningful data into the machines is the biggest problem right now. What machines can be done? You can put subject matter expert, run a formula, run multiple formulas, and try to get a meaningful solution. But what kind of data is, I don't think we have a clue. I don't think anybody has a clue whether the data what we are using is the right one. Right.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to add to this, Mudit, not sure if this directly answers your question, but one shift that I see happening in some of my client conversations is that I think the conversation is now moving from that, phase of flurry where it was like any and every data, get it collected, we will use it somehow. Right, and a lot of hope was being placed on, okay, we have these big data engines, we have this, we can run these models, etc. I think now there is some sense coming back to people saying that, hey, look, and the primary this, and then I don't think cost is a big factor here, anyways, as Vish pointed out, storage cost has been going down. But I think this some sense is coming back in terms of giving a bit more thought about, what is it that I need with what end goal? And that way is, while on one end, I see a lot of data being generated every day through IoT, more sensors, whatnot, etc. A lot of platforms enabling you to store more and more data, but which all of which actually is the fuel for AI and ML. But at the same time, some of those good old analytics day where before you construct your model, you think through, give some thought to, okay, what is my hypothesis? What are my right variables, etc. A bit of that coming back in the mix. So I see this kind of converging in the right direction.
Two very quick points just to add on top of Avinash, what you are mentioning. One is in terms of how much data we should be collecting. And you mentioned that, hey, anybody, whatever it is, let's make sure that it is coming. And what I see that many of the organization, what are they doing is they are basically having the concept of data lake. And the other one is the concept of data warehouse. In the data lake, basically they have a strategy in terms of how long I want to keep on getting the data in the data lake. And what happens is on top of this data lake, which is anything or everything which is coming, and you don't care about quality of the data, you don't care about what data it is, we basically keep on creating the warehouses. And warehouses will be basically having a bigger temporal aspect of the data, while the data lake will be basically decommissioned after 6 or 8 months or 9 months of time. That is one thing I wanted sort of everybody to know, that some of the organizations are doing it. And going back to Professor's point, one more important thing is, while we are having this thought of going from on-prem to the cloud for a number of reasons, one is on the volume side and other is on the cost of storage, etc. I think one very important thing is that wherever you want to consume the data, you want to store the data at the same place. For any consumption of the data, for running any of the data marts or any of the analytics, you do not want to be shipping the data from somewhere else to here. And hence what happens is, some of these cloud stacks, they are not only giving us a very good technology in terms of storing the data, but they're also giving a good set of utilities to consume the data, good set of ready-made models, basically, which can be readily available to consume data. And hence, the time to value with respect to what you want to do on top of this stored data is basically being reduced because of the adoption to the cloud. So yes, apart from the cost, I think the co-location of the storage and computation is one more driving factors with respect to how we should be moving the data from on-prem to somewhere else. So a couple of big points that I see in my professional life is happening.
Thank you. Yes, Sarthi.
Sorry, I'll just add one thing. And this is a little bit of a diversion from where the conversation is right now. Right now, the conversation is a lot around, cloud storage and how much data can we store, and, the constraint on a large part of the constraints we are placing when we're thinking about data storage is the capacity aspect of it, right? I'm going to swing the direction a little bit towards, should we be storing some of this data? And that's a large part of the conversation around privacy, right? One of the big questions that we ask is, should we even be storing this data? With GDPR and California protection law, and now like Australia's come out with their privacy laws, India's now close to passing the privacy bill. A lot of the times when storing data, one needs to think about the security of the data and the implications of the use of that data. And every time we think about AI or ML, we need to, it sounds crazy, but it's almost like we're sitting and thinking about every possible way that data could potentially be misused. And if there is a potential, that if there is a 1% chance that it can be misused, then it is not worth doing it. And when we think about, and that level of responsibility when dealing with data needs to start not just in the modeling stage, but also on the storage space. Like the security of today, the security of that data needs to be thought through. And if we feel like that data could be misused or there could be any sort of breach in privacy, then it is better not to store that data. Like that is a big factor to be considered. The capacity to store data is not just the only, the ethical question of should we be storing this is also one thing.
Yeah, that's very true. But and that will bring us to the next question that we'll come to later about the responsible AI and the explainable AI. So we'll discuss that in more detail about the ethicality of data and the ethicality of usage of that data. So yeah, storing data is like nowadays it's very easy. Everybody's online. So even today's session, we can store the whole data and we can even see the reactions, the chats, everything is stored. So the question comes that so much data is being stored. Where do we store it? How do we store it? And do we really need to store it? So yeah, Swapnil, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I agree with Aarti, right? I mean, now it's not about like just the capacity or the cost. It's more about privacy as well as I would say sustainability, right? So there are now techniques coming up, federated learning, edge computing, and the rationale behind that is pretty simple. Let's take an example of autonomous vehicles, right? So Tesla has built a huge model that helps cars drive autonomously. And now it's a reinforcement learning. So they need to keep learning about it. And now if they keep on getting all the data from all the cars driving on the streets all across the world, there is a massive carbon footprint we are leaving behind, be it storage on-prem or on cloud, right? And then there is also aspect of security, privacy, because customers may not be comfortable sharing all that driving history and behavior data. So with this edge computing, federated learning, we can use that localized data, update the model and just change the models back to the parent model, and the whole model gets updated without the need of like sending back the whole data and all those parameters like how fast he was driving and blah, 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 back to the cloud or on-prem.
Very, very interesting. Yes, Professor Bappa, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just two quick things. One, an apology to Purnima, because it appears that a group of quant guys have completely hijacked you, and that's why you should, come down hard on us as a good school teacher. And the second one was, I'm pretty intrigued by what Avinash had, because some of us coming from the old school of analytics where we believed in statistics, parameters, hypotheses, and the model should do that. I'm delighted that you're saying that, all this is bringing back a bit of that old thing back. But what really intrigues me is that the hypothesis way of solving a problem, that it's as if assumes that we understand a few things about human behavior, and let's go and check whether that's how they respond, and if they don't respond that way, what could be the possible reasons. One of the things which pandemic have done, and this is, I'm taking it from across all the panelists, this one and even the earlier one, that we don't understand human behavior that well, what pandemic has done. So given that, I would think that probably the reverse is true, that it's beginning of the end of hypothesis way of doing analytics, because we don't really understand, or we don't understand what we thought we understood. So let the data decide what has to be done. So you probably don't have to respond right now, because that would be completely make Purnima very angry,
Yeah,
because
I
she has
know
some
it's
questions.
hijacking the
But
conversation.
maybe at the end we can do that.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's very interesting thing, because yeah, earlier we were saying that we first hypothesize and then we collect data based on that, and now we are saying that okay, the data is there. Let's see what the patterns develop, and we come to great new insights from that data. And sometimes those insights can be misleading. And that is one of our questions, that when we talk about the responsible AI and machine learning and the ethical AI and machine learning, then what kind of collection of data and how we use this this new collection of data, how responsible are we? How responsible are we in using this? Is it fair? Is it fair to use this data, this analytics data that we are collecting, whether knowingly or unknowingly? Like some of us give the data willingly, but some of us don't even know that this data is being collected, although a lot of information is being provided nowadays. So that brings the next, I think I'll skip the middle part of this. We'll come to this discussion first, because I think everybody is keen to have this discussion more. That how would you go about, like, maybe Mr. Shukla, would you like to go first about fair AI or ethical AI or responsible AI? What is your take? Explainable AI. Like, what is your take? Like, how data should be used? How is it being used?
I will build upon to what Aarti was mentioning. I think she put the seed, and then now we are sort of growing the thoughts. Two things actually. Whether we should store the data or not, I think that's a very good question. But if I basically like to extend that question basically boils down to multiple parameters with respect to the stage at which we are collecting the data. So my question is that, hey, forget about the question of storing. First of all, do we need to ask the users that we are going to collect data? Is it ethical? Yes, no, I do not know. Do we need to collect the data? Because the data has to be instrumented before it basically comes to your system and it is basically being stored. I do not know. That's another way basically to look at it. Third one is, as what Aarti was mentioning, do we need to store the data? I do not know, again, but that's a question. Fourth one is, once this data is stored, do we need to have a very strong governance in the place in terms of ensuring that the data, the usage of the data, the models that we are going to build on top of it, is it legitimate? I don't know, legitimate or not, because we don't have those many laws, etc. yet in the base. But question is it ethical or not? And I just wanted to share a couple of small practices which used to happen in my previous organization. When my team, and I was basically running a team of like 60, 70 data scientists, when we used to go to the businesses and ask that, hey, I need your data, they need to say that, hey, why do you need it? So there has to be a set of questions in place in terms of saying it, why do you need the data? And many times what used to happen that, and there was a governance in place to ensure that none of the information which is very personal to the information, which is called, I was in the healthcare company, so it used to be called PHI and PIA information. So any information which is very specific to even a given individual, it must not be shared. And two, when we are running the model, when we are trying to identify the pattern, we don't need that anyways, because somebody's phone number, somebody's name is not going to be any of my feature during the model building process. Because what does models do? Basically, they try to identify the patterns in the given data, and hence this information is not useful for me anyways. And hence having a governance in place in terms of how the data should be used, how the data should be protected, and if needed, should the data be masked, or if needed, should the data be anonymized? These things are basically have to be in place in terms of having a stronger governance in the place before the consumption layer basically comes into the picture. Because end of the day, once the models are built, they are the black box, and then you can give the model back to the businesses and they can basically start using it the way they want to use. And of course, they also have to be very ethical about the usage of it. So I think when we talk about, I'm not coming on the explainable AI part of it because that's altogether a different topic. But with respect to the ethical usage of the data, I think we have to start thinking in the overall lifetime of data acquisition to the data consumption with respect to how you want to use it. As a data scientist, I would say that yes, I do not need any information which is very specific to a given customer in terms of at least building my models. Yes, when the recommendations are there, when the recommendations are working, maybe you need to give it back to the business. And business can definitely use that models in a black box way to basically give very personalized information to the businesses. So there are ways to do it, but yes, we have to be ethical about it. And I think when you talk about explainable AI, Dr. Purnima, I think it is altogether a different thing where I do not want to mix both of these topics. It's more about when those models are built and when you basically want to know that why some of the features are selected. For example,
basically unbiasedness, whether they are biased, like
yes,
depending upon the kind of
want
data that
to
you
give
feed.
an explanation to why the model is behaving in a certain way. So let's keep that discussion aside. But these are few of my points on ethical usage of the data and ethical consumption of the data.
Thank you, Mr. Shukla. Mr. Vish Podapati, would you like to continue with this conversation? Mr. Podapati? Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So I think I want to divide this in two parts. First is the whole concept of the social platforms or the smartphone things or the e-commerce data. The whole platform is created is to have a digital footprint, right? And so once we get the digital footprint, and that's where people like us start using the data. And for what do we want to use the data is a secondary question. right? So I might want to use for market, Aarti wants to use for branding or marketing, but my point is, whether we want or not, data is being used for elections across the globe, and the behavioral patterns are being used across the globe. So again, there are no ethics standards. There's no prescribed law, as Vineet mentioned it. So data is available. Till the time it is available, you can use it. And for what are we using it is, again, people have been using data for the dark web too. Right now, the dark web data is also being used. So again, there's no prescribed law that government didn't come and say that you can't use the dark web data. So again, it is all about the kind of culture we build. And I think people in India are actually building in the kind of decent products. I think products are also good and data is also pretty fine. So there's no ethics part as such here.
Okay, so yeah, that's true. Like data, a lot of times we give data willingly without even knowing that we are giving data. Like, loyalty programs, getting loyalty cards. All this is basically like a form of data collection where they are trying to handle the way we purchase things and the way we do things without even realizing that's being used somewhere by somebody for some reason. So I don't know whether it's ethical or not ethical, because we are providing it willingly. And if the people use
Absolutely.
it, then it's their way, because we have already given the data for some benefit, because we do see some benefit in using those loyalty cards, and therefore we willingly provide all our information that we want. Even our fingerprints and our face recognition software, all these things, the data is being collected and used somewhere or the other. But another thing which I don't know, any of the panelists can take this, would you like to continue with this on this front, is when I meant explainable AI, what I meant was that sometimes the machine learning algorithms, the kind of AI they give us, they tend to be biased because of the kind of information, because machine anyway is not very intelligent. Let's face it, it's not as intelligent as human beings. So it is artificial intelligence, and that is depending upon whatever data we feed in, we get in analysis based on that. So that's what I was talking about a little bit about explainable AI, that how much of it we can explain, the kind of models that they come out with, how much are we able to explain those models, and is it ethical to use those models which are based on maybe faulty data, and how do we ensure that we are responsibly using that data that we get? Yeah, Aarti would like to take this.
I would like to, while I answer this, I would like to Professor Bappa made, which is this is exactly where the basics of statistics come in. And this is exactly why we still need analysts, and not all models can be run by AI. To go back to your question, yes, models can, we can now, get a machine to sort of run a model and throw a lot of data at it and get some results. There will be some model, right? But to the aspect of, was the data representative? Does the data that was collated have an inherent bias? And therefore, would the model results be biased? Still need that to go back to that basics of statistics of what was our hypothesis? What exactly was the question we were trying to ask? What the problem that we are trying to solve for? And I don't think there exists anything called clean data. I don't think there is the perfect unbiased data set. And therefore, the whole point of, yes, in every kind of data set, there is a bias. Is that bias that is going to change the findings, or is that bias something that I'm willing to live with because it does not impact my findings? Is the call that the analyst takes. And that's again where the fundamentals of statistics and econometrics and an understanding of how these computations work comes in, right? I'll also push a little bit towards some fundamentals like type 1 and type 2 error. Any model, there exists no model that comes without any error, right? Like the very act of measurement induces error. There exists no measurement, and there exists no model that does not have an associated error that comes that is there. Now, again, what is the nature of that error and what is the extent of the error that I am willing to live with is a decision that an analyst makes. And it's not something that we can sort of leave to a machine to decide. Right? So that would be my only point in terms of the ethics and the explainability of
Thanks, Arati. Yeah, Mr. Shukla, like to add.
I just wanted to give a very real life example, and I know that we have so many students and there are so many practitioners who are doing machine learning and AI, and I just wanted their attention for this particular example that basically I'm trying to make. So what happened is in the healthcare area, we came up with a model which basically can predict if looking at the DICOM image, which is an X-ray image, by the way, it can predict if a person is having tuberculosis or not, right? And as Aarti is mentioning, all these models are basically going to have either type 1 error or type 2 error, or you call it like either it is bias thing, it's an overfitting model, or it's an underfitting model, or you talk about bias or variance, whatever you want to talk about, in the end of the day, it's the same thing. But eventually, we have to think that how we are going to use this model. And if I go to a doctor and I say that, hey, I have made a model which is 98% accurate, and I'm jumping in the joy and saying that, hey, you know what? And this is very good model, 95% is a good score. So doctor will say, get lost. Because still you are playing with the life of 2% of the people, and I cannot do that. I don't need your model. And hence your model has to be 100% accurate. And I know that as a data scientist, there doesn't exist a 100% accurate model because they are probabilistic in nature. And hence, what should I do? How do we solve this problem? So in order to make sure that, Professor Purnima, to your point, that how do we make sure that these models are going to be consumed by the doctor? So what we started doing was in this particular case, we started making high recall models. High recall models are those models where you are making sure that there could be n number of false positives, but there could be 0 false negatives. What essentially it means that if anybody is having tuberculosis, that person must be caught with this particular model, even though it is going to give me n number of false positives. Why? Because after that, anyway, that person will go through some more tests, and we will be able to figure out that this person is not having the tuberculosis. And hence, when we think of using this explainable AIs, etc., we basically start thinking that how should I be tuning this model? And as soon as I know that my model is ensuring that none of the person who is having the tuberculosis will not go uncaught, I am good. Doctors are happy. And yes, I am having some of the false positives. There's some amount of extra human effort has to happen, but it's a good trade-off with respect to the human lives that we are basically dealing with. So these are one of the real life example to what Aarti was mentioning in terms of letting you guys know.
Very interesting, Mr. Shukla, because that's what we need to, and that's why we say that hopefully our jobs are still there, because human intervention is definitely still be required to make sense of these models. But another thing which I want to extend this question to is that when we're talking about this responsible AI or ethical AI and the storage of data, that becomes a very important thing. That do we need to store this data? Should we store this data? Right. So, Mr. Chandra, would you like to take that?
Sure, and I think I would probably, with your permission, Dr. Purnima, we are a bit away from storage. We have had enough conversation on that, right? On this entire ethics of AI, right? On this topic. See, generally we tend to, and especially all of us who are probably on this call and this MBA community, etc. We are all very rational, scientific, objective creatures, right? We don't realm a lot in the we don't dwell a lot in the realm of philosophy, where there are certain nuances between what is a bias, what is ethics, what are values, etc., etc., etc. And I think this is where, if you were to extend AI and all the things you read about someday AI becoming so powerful that it controls human beings, etc., lots of those things, that these streams start merging. And especially to your question, right? And I have personally been giving it a lot of thought, right? So let's just take three things: ethics, values, and biases, right? So ethics are kind of norms by which we live. These are generally accepted norms. Biases are, things that happen, but we don't see, we discover them over time. So, biases against certain communities, blah, 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 in our decision making, we discover them over time. So there are biases that are existing today that we don't know about, right? And values, but so biases are kind of in some way a smaller set. Values, these are very, very personal, some ways linked to the ethics, but very personal. Now, how do they interact when it comes to AI? Probably many of you might have heard of these examples of autonomous cars. So a self-driven car driving, seeing a passenger in front of it, violating the traffic norms. So what does the car do? Does the car veer off the road and kill the passenger that's sitting inside? Or does it actually go on its course? Because that's what it's supposed to do. That's in some ways, that's the right thing to do. The passenger, the pedestrian is at fault. Should it kill the pedestrian? Now, how does the car make these decisions? When you are training the data for autonomous vehicle, right? Clearly, there is no universal way of how these decisions are made, because these decisions, if God forbid we get into, any one of us gets into that situation, we would make that decision based on that context, our personal values. Now, these things are, so the idea is these things are getting more and more complex, right? This is what the point I'm trying to impress. So one takeaway, that this entire field needs a lot more thinking than overall as a data analytics, AI community, or as a society that we are giving it today. Yes, I know it's a topic. When we talk about AI, we talk about ethics, but perhaps where the conversation is at large across the globe, it's still scratching the surface of it. That is one point I want to make. Second point I want to make is, which goes specific to your question, ethical AI, fair AI, responsible AI, explainable AI, etc. Right? Now, given the way I explained, ethics, values, biases, etc., these are very subjective. They may vary from one person to the other. They may also vary from one era to the next. Slavery was very well accepted 100 years back, not anymore today. Right? Same society 100 years later. So I personally, and I know this is easier said than done, would go for explainable AI, as hard as it is, because you derive the most value from your data and machine learnings when you let the models do their job, which is run themselves and come up with output that you can trust, right? So while that's where most value of AI ML is, I would still be okay to trade off a bit of that value for getting an AI which is explainable, because as a kind of human race, our criteria, what is fair, what is biased, unbiased, what's ethical, etc., will keep changing. We are in this for the long run. This AI is not going away in 2 years. So as long as we understand what's going in, we can keep updating it based on how our values and how our social systems, etc., evolve. So I think that's an important point. I would pound the table for that. I know that may not have many supporters, but if we think deeper, I think that's a conclusion that I would assume many of us reach.
Yeah, that's very true. In fact, as we say that we should not dehumanize AI, it should be taken with the human touch, that understand how it is and use it as a tool to help us, not believe it as the holy grail. So kind of that is what something is there. Mrs. Swapnil, I think we would like to take your views also.
Certainly. So yeah. I mean, just for the benefit of students, right, as we heard from panelists as well, this is a real concern. And the industry leaders are saying that, right? I mean, Elon Musk has said AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Bill Gates support him that, and he's wondering why people are not concerned about this. Stephen Hawking said on the similar lines, if we are not careful, AI could be the worst event in human civilization. So the concerns are very real, what people talked about. There have been a lot of examples, a lot of negative praise companies have received when data scientists waded in murky water. Now some of us may already know that long time back when I was in the US, the Target came up with a genius solution. The data scientists came up with that solution to predict if a woman is pregnant or not. So they combined the baby registry information with the shopping behavior, and they built a model that could predict if you are pregnant and which trimester you are in. So it was that precise. And using that, they could do a targeted promotional activity. So they sent out coupons to a teenager girl about all these baby products. And those coupons were found by the teenager girl's father, and he got really angry. He went to the Target store, and it created a lot of negative praise. Target apologized, but after that, they found out that girl was in fact pregnant. Father didn't know about it. But still, right? I mean, so it was a genius solution built by Target, but was it appropriate? Probably not. They received a lot of flack about it, right? So, and it's not easy, right? It's a very hard problem. I think Avinash talked about that autonomous vehicle example. That's also close to me. Just to build a little bit more on that. So what he said is like the vehicle is driving, it's a green light, so vehicle is supposed to go. One person is sitting inside, 10 people are crossing the street. So they are breaking the law. The pedestrians are breaking the law. What should that machine do? Because like someone can argue that, hey, save 10 lives. Someone say, hey, follow the rules. Those people are breaking the rules. So hit them, right? And would that decision change if one person is crossing the street and 10 people are in the car? So these are very difficult problems. It can't just be solved by, I would say, a chief analytics officer or AI/ML team. It has to be driven top down from the top of the house, CEO, business leaders, what's there. I think people talked about the values and behaviors. So how those values, behaviors translate into what you're building on your AI models. And like just for the benefit of students, I know when students come in, a lot of quant folks come in and they want to build like the latest and greatest, use transformers, BERT and what GPT-3, but like most of the time, especially in the regulatory industry, such as financial services, what we have seen is the simpler, the better, right? It helps you get the trust from the business leaders, trust from the regulators, and it can then get deployed, get into production. Otherwise, the rate of deployment is pretty low. Like what we see is like only 10% of the model get into production. Other models don't ever see the light of the day.
Very true. Swapnil, that's very true. And that is the dilemma of, I think, AI and how to use AI, because some people promote that, okay, AI is everything. And some people say, no, we should not believe in it. So that's a, I think, debate which is still going on. And as you said in the beginning, that a lot of people are criticizing data scientists, saying that what were you doing when the COVID was doing, like whatever predictions were being made, they were all falling. And every month new prediction would come in and it was all falling. So yeah, that is a debate which would go on. I think time only will tell what is right and what is wrong. So yeah, should I go with Aarti first or with Professor Muditz? Aarti, I think I'll give the panelist a friend. Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
No, Aarti, you go first. We just had a question which I'll ask after you.
So mine is not a question, so let me go first. So the only thing, and we did stray a little bit to the philosophical side, and like, yes, there's a rational side to AI, and there's a little bit of philosophical side to AI. The only thing that I will say, and maybe I'm going to coin a new phrase right now. So it's not just explainable AI. I think there needs to be some humility in AI. I think a lot of the machine learning and AI conversation has lost its humility and has become like, it started to make AI sound like, we can predict everything. And that's, there is like I said, there is an associated error. And so it helps to think about, and this is, again, a strain of philosophy, but it helps to think about a lot of our models as decision support systems and not decision-making systems. And if we think about, if we start to think about at least our models in the beginning as decision support systems, the importance of the explainability of our models becomes that much higher. Because at the end of the day, and if we go back to the tuberculosis example, the model can say what the likelihood of that person having tuberculosis is. But at the end of the day, the person making the decision to take that next test or not is the doctor. And that's what I mean by decision support system versus decision making system, right? If the model was to go ahead and prescribe the tests and do the tests, and then that would be a decision-making system. In the case of the car, self-driving car, the model has become a decision-making system, and that's where it's scary. As long as we make sure that there are some checks and balances, and that's why the explainability is important, we're able to sort of keep the ethical side of the models in check. The problem is the problematic scenarios, and that's all the quotes, are where we start to think about AI models as decision makers. And that's where we sort of get into this dangerous territory, because we're basically losing that control over where those value systems go.
Yeah, very true. I think that's what we always say, like even in HR, when you talk about HR analytics, we have to be very careful about that. Whatever information that the data gives us, we don't take it as the fact, but we use it as a tool to understand that, okay, what can this tell us and how do we react to it? So that our reactions, I think, become more important. And that's what I think when we talk about values and ethics and even the biasness. And that is why I was trying to talk about explainable AI, because if you're able to explain why this result is coming, even if it doesn't seem to be right, but if we're able to explain why, then maybe we can make a better decision. I don't know. That's the debate, I think, which data scientists and all like you experts will talk about. I'm still a novice into this field. Yes, Professor.
So, Dr. Purnima, with your permission, I would like to make one quick point. I know we are running out of time, but what Aarti brought out is a really very, very interesting kind of distinction and concept, which is great for all of us, especially the students, to keep in mind. Also, I would like to add to this that increasingly the way our kind of, again, the world is evolving, we are using AI more and more to make more real-time decisions again, and this is not decision support, right? And then personally, I believe that that's not the right direction to take, but increasingly commercial compulsions, right, force us to kind of use AI to make a lot of real-time decisions and make them at a scale. So a lot of fake news, hate content, if you talk to folks who are running these content platforms, right, their biggest worry is this hate content, fake news, etc. They have an army of people trying to moderate it, but all they are doing is kind of supervising what the models recommend. And the intensity or the frequency at which the algorithms, which actually determine what content gets promoted, what gets shown to whom, etc., changes. All of that already is in the realm of today unexplainable AI. So if you talk to a kind of product manager at Facebook, he or she would not be able to explain how algorithm changed between yesterday and today. So I think this is a real danger that all of us need to guard against as we drive the frontiers of this area. That how do we kind of balance the commercial interest in whatever we do? Commercial interest would always be in favor of a scale, real time, build it more, etc., etc., versus things that are right and the right approach to things. And it helps to start with just knowing this distinction and keeping that in mind.
Right, very true. Yes, so we have actually not 5 panelists, we have 7 panelists. So Professor Mudit and Professor Bappa are also 2 panelists. So yeah, Professor Mudit.
Yes, so I know Professor Purnima and Pen our guests. I know we are running out of time, but I couldn't help myself, asking the question, which was, so one is what Avinash said, so when we talk about, I heard the views that, these days, it almost seems like we are overloading business with too many social requirements, right? So we always talk about this, businesses need to be responsible for climate change, businesses need to be responsible for, responsible data strategy, fair AI. Somewhere there is a question of how much do we overload business? As Milton Friedman said, the business of business is only business. So Avinash made an important point that ultimately commercial imperatives will prevail. My question to you was, which has been playing in my mind was, and this thing has been on my mind for quite some time, because I have been studying cloud for, quite a number of months, My question to you is something like this. We have companies like MapMyIndia, which got floated on a stock exchange, which has real-time locational intelligence, and its retail portion got subscribed in just an hour on the first day of its IPO. And I was looking at its red herring prospectus, and it says that it competes with Google. So my question to any of you panelists, I know we are running out of time, is how do you see this balance of big tech, right? Because big tech companies like Google, which have operating systems of almost like 90% of Android devices, TV is now almost digital. They can monitor, and they have a natural monopoly in terms of capturing the scale, scope, and the real-time context of the data compared to any other company, which means that probably it's a natural data monopoly. And as Indian businesses and Indian industry, I think Swapnil was asking the point whose responsibility it is to actually ask for regulations, right? And as the context of regulation and ethics and compliance and reporting might change dynamically over time. How do you see, is there a level playing field between what big tech is doing or it is supposed to do? And how do Indian businesses actually deal with this question? Is it too early for us to be the social, crusader in this cause, or should we confine only to commercial imperatives and leave this question for time to answer, or probably for governments to get together and answer? Or should we take active lead like we always do and make our businesses a little bit uncompetitive? I don't think our international costs in a lot of areas match with costs with some other countries, and we know which country that is. So if we are to protect our own interest, how do you see that we see our role of big tech versus the local things? And do you think companies have any role in asking for regulatory structures of regulating big tech? Has that time come to control and create the level playing field? Because it seems to be outside the scope of Competition Commission, which is already there, because they don't have the competency to deal with technology issues, or for that matter, it will require a completely different sort of a regulator. So I just wanted to go around and ask your views on that. Big tech versus local businesses. Should we at all care for social concerns in India? Why do we have to burden our businesses when big tech, by the way, they collect all the information and locational intelligence in real time, by the way. So how do we make our businesses competitive with respect to that? And do you think time has come for India to leverage its power and ask for regulation on big tech as other countries and other jurisdictions are doing?
So Modit, I think very, very deep and loaded questions. I don't have straight answers. But one thing I could say, I have been thinking about these issues as well, and looks like to me us being a bit more vigilant, pushing government for regulation to create a level playing field. Also knowing the fact that we are already a bit late in the game. So as much as you try, you can't create level playing field. You can't, raise another Google in India. You can't raise another Apple in India, and so on and so forth. Still going forward, if at least we could make sure that two things. One, for the new businesses that are coming up and a number of unicorns and product-based companies that are growing in our country over the past 2-3 years is a wonderful, cheerful news, right? Keeping that in mind, how do we kind of support them? That's one. Two, how do we kind of protect our businesses from some of the clearly unfair practices of the big tech? Are things that we should expect our government to do, and we should do whatever to kind of get the right regulations in place. It is possible. Europe is doing it very well, I would say, as well as it could be done at this stage. So it should be possible for us to do that. And to me, the only solution seems like doing it through the government.
I'll just add to it, right? So I agree, the concern is very real, but the only big techs are not the only bad guys, right? If you look at Zomato and Swiggy, what they are doing, they understood the customer preference, they got all the restaurants on board, and now they know that this person is going to order biryani, so they have set up their own cloud kitchen and discounting it heavily so that the customer, when next time is ready to order biryani, that order doesn't go to that small restaurant but to Zomato or Swiggy's cloud kitchen, right? So all these big players are trying to leverage or abuse the information or the data they have for their own benefit. Of course, I agree.
That is a business practice, and it will be regulated by Competition Commission. My question was with effective regulation of the way big tech are using their platforms to collect more and more information, because it seems like individuals who have to use Android phone or install any particular software. I can't do anything on Chrome without actually signing, which gives them real-time context into practically everything, right? So how will companies like Map My India, who have built substantial equity and information base in terms, will compete with firms like, I was reading an article the other day, don't want to name specific platforms, but I can't help it, RuPay versus, the other companies, right? So how do we promote our own platforms and build up similar and ensure that big techs are not using their clout? And every country seems to be doing that, but it seems like we are a little late. And my only point is that sometimes we have this tendency as Indians, and I'm saying it with a little bit of heart. We have a tendency to actually accept things that we have to be good to the world, while the other countries do not. I mean, it's like a public good from economics perspective, right? And I often quote to my students, yeah, ma'am, I'm just concluding with one sentence that, the business of business is only business and nothing else. And we should not take undue burden in terms of things that make our businesses uncompetitive. That was, sorry, Swapnila, couldn't say.
Yeah,
No, I think that's fair.
Aarti wanted to say something.
So I just wanted to add a couple of points. So Mudit, to your question, I think one thing to keep in mind is when we think about some of these global companies like Google or Facebook or Apple, it is very hard for companies like this to think about each country's privacy laws. They're building one system that needs to be consistent across the globe. Google's look and feel needs to be the same wherever in the world you access Google. Similarly, Facebook's look and feel needs to be the same wherever in the world you access Facebook, right? That the power of the product is in the consistency that you see across the world. Now, when you want to build a product like that works consistently across the world, it's got to comply to the toughest standards in the world. And so, to a certain extent, what the laws in specifically in India or Australia or Europe or the US is not what some of these global conglomerates are building for. They're building for the toughest standard in the world. If the toughest standard in the world is GDPR as of today, or everybody needs to be GDPR compliant, and by virtue of the fact that they are GDPR compliant, they will be compliant to every other data privacy law in the world, right? So that's when we look at any of any of these responsibilities, that is something that the large agents in this system are holding themselves to. So to a certain extent, going back to your example, Map My India actually has an advantage. They are not working with the number of rules that the larger guys are working with. They're working only within the India system, versus these guys are working against a much tougher system. So I think there's a little bit of a balance that we need to think about. We need to think about not just the perspective of how the system works in India, but also the kind of constraints that each one of the agents in the system is working with. Because the constraints from India is not the same as the constraints for the others, right? So that's one thing to think about when you think about business models and what each one of these companies can or cannot do, right? The other thing is, I'm not sure in today's world scale is an advantage, right? As a matter of fact, small means agile, and small means relevant. So I don't think the one thing that the digital world has taught us is that scale is not always an advantage. It was in an old world economic context, but it may not be. It may not always be today.
So I don't agree with you on the scale part, Aarti.
So I think that's great. We have just one question that I think one student is waiting for a long time to ask. So with your permission, I think this debate can carry on later. We are running out of time. So this one question which is there with anyone who wants to take it can take it. That what are some of the AI strategies that can help marketers to go phygital, that is physical plus digital? So right now we have either physical or we have either digital. So are there any strategies now that AI is pursuing that we can have both? So anyone like to take that?
I don't think, honestly, I don't think whatever that word, physical plus digital.
Phygital.
I don't think any business has a choice anymore. The one thing that has happened over time is digital has become at the core of every single business. As a matter of fact, there are businesses that are surviving purely digital without any physical. There are today entire banks that have zero number of branches. So I don't think digital adoption of digital is a choice anymore. We just all have to adopt. The speed of adoption or the rate or the level of adoption will be different, but I don't think there is any choice. And so people adopt AI strategies or data strategies depending on the rate of change that they can afford or their businesses can afford and they're able to feasibly do. But I don't like at this point, there is no choice but to do.
Thank you. There's one more question. I think Professor Bappa asked that question, that with this pandemic, we have a lot of businesses going out of business, because of lockdowns. So can AI help
Yes,
in this scenario?
I was raising my hand just to ask that question and make one small comment. Since the question has been asked, can I make the comment less than a minute?
Yes.
So basically, there was a fascinating discussion on AI ethics and all, and what are the things which we have. So I was just thinking that probably, we probably need to take a bit of Rawlsian approach. That what is the ethics which we want to do in analytics or AI? So imagine that you are on the other side. So what decision would you have liked the AI guy to have taken which affects your life? I think if we ask the question ourselves before doing an AI, that might help a bit. That if we were on the other side, where people sitting in Hyderabad, Bangalore, Gurgaon, or I don't know, Bucharest, making a decision on my life, what would you want that guy to do? Slightly more Rawlsian, but that's the one. And the question I think was pretty simple, and maybe we have already covered that a bit. Is that we saw during the pandemic some of the sectors like hospitality, tourism, they completely shut down, and some of them went out of business. While a lot of businesses flourished, some of them completely got destroyed. So what could analytics do to kind of damage the law, so that if such a thing happens for some other reason 2 years down the line, the same thing doesn't happen, that some sectors are just kind of gone pushed out of business?
So anyone take up for that question?
I think my question, I will dare to answer the question with a question. Some of the, I think one of the things we need to think about is some of the businesses that went bust because of the lockdown. Were they actually already like irrelevant and that's why they went bust? Because a lot of other businesses have survived, right? I think one of the questions to ask is, did some of these businesses shut down because they were no longer relevant to their consumers? And so I think the question to ask and the analysis to do would be for any business to think about what is the benefit that they provide their users? What is the value they provide the users? And how can they evolve that value proposition to the user? At the end of the day, it is a utility function, right? I mean, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to the fundamental principles of statistics and economics, but any business survives because they provide a utility to their customers or consumers, right? And we need to think about maximizing that utility and providing that utility with the constraints that are provided in the system. And so that, to my mind, if the constraint is so big that there is no longer utility to the end consumer, then perhaps some of those businesses were just like, they were end of life. If we think about it, cameras have gone out of business. And, for the simple reason that now every mobile phone is a camera, right? So there is a certain natural life cycle to certain businesses. So I'm not sure, like with some of the businesses, I'm not sure the correlation that they happen to shut down during the pandemic is the causality. I mean, we need to separate the correlation from the causality.
Okay, so I think what I was asking was, can AI help in some way for these businesses which saw the shutdown during the pandemic? So
if I can take a very short attempt
Yes,
at that, I think this is more around, his question is more around industries. Some industries suffered more than others, and how, if at all, AI analytics can help. I would say, hopefully, this pandemic is in some ways a black swan type of event, right? Big impact, not anticipated, etc. Thankfully, that impact, even though it is still lingering, but if you purely look at numbers, GDP, etc., they're all bouncing back faster than we had anticipated when we all went into lockdown at the beginning of wave 1, when it seemed like this was a huge, not only demand disruption, but also supply disruption. So some changes that I see, and then this goes beyond AI analytics in the business that we as business leaders are making, is one big change is that we are proactively kind of seeding ways and means in our business to be slightly more resilient. And I'll give you one example. Maybe supply chain is a good example, right? So my organization, for example, and all my life, I have worked in professional services where people are your inventory essentially, right? So over the past decade or so, we were going more and more on making people more productive, right? So how can I take my utilization of people from 70% to 80, from 80 to 90? Suddenly, because of pandemic, we realized that it's more important to have some, to build resiliency. It's more important to kind of compromise a bit on productivity, keep some spare capacity that could be deployed in situations like these. Now, this is just one example, but if you talk to people in supply chain, etc., one big takeaway is that businesses have become more resilient and they understand the concept of resiliency slightly better at the cost of efficiency. And that's a huge change. And I hope that we don't get into these situations again. Clearly, we are much better prepared today to deal with this pandemic, various waves, and future such pandemics that might come up. So that way, I think not necessarily analytics, but I think overall, we have all had these examples in our businesses and in our lives that is just making us more prepared to face these in the future. And in some of these, by the way, travel and hospitality, it went down, but again, it came back faster than anything else. As people were doing revenge travel, etc. So this was temporary, and I hope next pandemic does not make the dent that was made this time around.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I think we have gone way over time. Mr. Shukla, I think he raised his hand. I missed him. But would you like to say something, Mr. Shukla?
No, because we were going beyond the time, so I basically raised my hand down just to be appreciative of everybody's time. But now that you asked me, very quick comment on top of what Avilash has mentioned. I don't think when the overall demand changes suddenly on some of the businesses, machine learning and AI can do a lot, because that's how some of these businesses are. But I think that, when somebody is locked inside the door, you cannot take them out. But as soon as this lock is open and people are basically peeping out to go out, that's where basically you need to see those opportunities. And how do you basically make that transition from being not in demand and suddenly being in demand is where actually the machine learning AI can into the picture. In those cases, you need to bring in a little bit of insights. You need to bring in a little bit of strategies which are driven by machine learning and AI, where I need to ensure people who are coming to my resort, where do I need to vaccinate? How do I need to vaccinate? How do I make sure that the supply chain is covered in terms of how people are coming to my resort, and so on and so forth. So my idea, my conclusion to this question would be from my side is, you can't do a lot, but when this is over, then basically how you make that transition smooth in terms of going from zero demand to a good demand is where machine learning and AI should be coming into the picture.
Right. Yeah, very true. Thank you so much, Mr. Shukla. That is, I think, we have been seeing that a lot of restaurants and all, they're reaching out to us on social media saying we are open. And that is one way that those who did that maybe survived and those who didn't maybe could not. So I think it was a wonderful discussion. I know we have gone way over time, but I don't think I could have stopped the discussion anywhere because it was so interesting. So over to you, Kirti, I think, or Angela, whoever wants to take it. Yeah, Angela.
Yes, ma'am.
Over to you, Angela.
What a wonderful and insightful panel we've had today. I would now like to invite Dr. Kirti Sharma, convener for Sapience 2021 and professor in the area of accounting and finance, to give the concluding remarks for Sapience 2021.
Thank you, Angela. Dr. Sanyal, you raised your hand. Request you to go first. Sanyal, sir, can you hear us?
So you're on mute.
I just want to thank the panel and the lovely questions we had and the way it went along. I think for a single moment, I didn't find it was boring at all. I learned so much from this Kabile Tarif. So I just want to thank all the panelists and everyone who has contributed today. Professor Mudit, Professor Purnima, it was fascinating to see you moderating this session, to be honest. And we are truly a cross-functional organization now. And Bappa, excellent. And to conclude, this was the last panel discussion of our Sapient 2021-22. And I would like to thank all the members of the Sapient team, the CCS, and last but not the least, Kirti, for doing such a marvelous job. And doing it, I can see that when someone is committed, we can get great results. Thank you, everyone, and all the panelists over all the sessions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So it's my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks for Sapience 2021. And I would like to convey my deepest appreciation for our panelists for the day, Ms. Bhardwaj, Mr. Chandra, Mr. Tambi, Mr. Shukla, and Mr. Podapati. Thank you for your insightful contributions, some of the interesting takeaways, separating noise from signal, data biases, importance of right data for AI ML, definitely are great takeaways for all of us. I would also like to thank corporate dignitaries who spared their time to participate in the panels for Sapience 2021 and made this year's discussions fruitful and thought-provoking. I wish to express my deep sense of gratitude to our own Mr. Mohan Lakam Raju for being a constant source of motivation, enabling us to reach greater heights and making Great Lakes as a center of excellence. I would like to thank Mr. Gautam Lakam Raju and his team. Thank you, Sushri, Bruno, and Neha for your wholehearted support. Creatives and collaterals, you rock. Thank you, Dr. Sanyal, our director, Dr. Venkatesh, Program Director, PGPM, Dr. Singh, Program Director, PGDM, for your constant guidance and support. A big thank you to all my faculty colleagues for their constant guidance and support in the planning of the event, as well in the successful execution of the event by identifying and inviting panelists, moderating the panels, and fulfilling all the responsibilities. It wouldn't have been possible without you. A special thanks to the CCS team, Shelja, Selja, and Amanpreet for inviting industry dignitaries, making the panels richer. Thanks, Shweta and Program Office headed by Mr. Shankar for helping in planning and executing the event. The Admin and Accounts Department headed by Mr. Samaran, and IT team comprising of Pintu, Chandraprakash, and Yashu for making the Sapience successful as a virtual event. As flowers come together to make a bouquet beautiful, I'm thankful to each member of the GLIM family who helped us make Sapience a success. I'm thankful to the student council members. This is my team who was working at the back end to make Sapience a success. And the spark for Sapience was Avinash. Let's give a big hand to him for the excellent contribution he made. And the student volunteers who worked as MCs, making this event a grand success. You shall always be fondly remembered. Last but not the least, thanks Chevaliers, Warriors, and Rajputs for your patient listening and thought-provoking questions. The annual management conclave was held online for the second consecutive year, but we hope as things change for good, we get to meet for the next conclave offline. With this, Sapiens 2021 comes to an end. We look forward to seeing you all in the next edition of Sapiens with equal zeal and vigor. Thank you so much and have a great evening.